Hey y'all, it's Dr. Wright, and today we are going to be talking about middle childhood cognitive development. So we've got our 6 to 12s, and these folks are attending school. They are learning to read and learning to do math and learning to budget their time not so well, by the way. They are learning new strategies to create memories. They are, what else? They are learning lots of new information. So, for example, geography, science, things like that. They are learning about how their brain learns, which we think of as what we call metacognition. So, thinking about how I learn. We can talk about that in terms of metacognition. Um, this chapter looks at a couple of things. It looks at moral development, it looks at cognitive development and cognitive change throughout this time span. And one thing that we'll see is that a lot of our younger kids, in terms of moral development, are very much black and white. So it's either wrong or it's right. And as they get older, they start to realize, okay, in certain situations, this might be okay, but in most situations, it's not. And then as they move into late adolescence and adulthood, they start to realize that, there's lots of social stuff going on that might impact whether or not this is appropriate or not behavior. But you will hear from your younger kids that, like, well, you just don't do that. That's not appropriate. That's not right. You just, that's just not how the world works, things like that. Um, and you can get some understanding of how a child is in terms of their moral development by, asking them, okay, if a man had a sick wife and he couldn't afford medicine, but, and this is actually an assessment that is used or has been used by Kohlberg, and he couldn't afford the medicine, but a pharmacy had the medicine, would it be okay for him to steal the medicine from the pharmacy to give to his sick wife? And so the child's answer to the question kind of tells us where are they in terms of their level of moral development and understanding the social implications of morality and the choices that they make and things like that. So we will be looking at, I'm just flipping through the book to see, I don't want to miss anything that's interesting. So yeah, we're talking about moral development. We're going to be talking about information, memory strategies. So we'll talk about the information processing model. And so we'll, look at short-term memory, long-term memory, all those sorts of things, and how they work so that we can help children to move something from a sense memory into their longer term memory, through either repetition or through rote learning or rote memorization. We can use sensory information to help them learn things. So, for example, songs, things like that. We can talk about, chunking information or putting information together into a group. So think about like singing the ABCs. It's not really remembering 26 small pieces of information. It's more like chunking bits of stuff together in order to remember how to sing your alphabet. And if you've ever heard a child sing an alphabet or sing the alphabet many times, LMNOP becomes like one word that just has like multiple sounds to it because they've chunked this information together in their understanding of it. So we can help these kids focus on new memory strategies such as creating flashcards, repetition, things like that. I remember, and not every memory strategy is going to work for every child. And as parents, as teachers, as advocates for children, we need to remember that. So sometimes, setting something to music can be helpful. Sometimes recording yourself reading your notes and playing them back to you can be beneficial. If a child has a learning disability or a learning difference, then figuring out what strategies work for them and utilizing those strategies can be useful. Um, Listening to a book or listening to an audio book, as opposed to having to sit down and read the book, especially if the child has dyslexia, or another reading challenge can be beneficial. Um, my older son is now 13, and he's always been what we call a reluctant reader. It's boring to him. He's got autism, he's got ADHD. He does not have the patience to sit there and just do this one thing of reading a book. And it doesn't interest him. And he's amazed that I sit there with my Kindle and like just sit and read a book. And he's like, how can you not do something else? I'm like, well, I don't have ADHD. I have the autism, but I don't have the ADHD. So I can sit and read my Kindle and not need other stimuli or things like that. But so in seventh grade, he had to do book reports. Every quarter, he had to write a book report. And the idea of him sitting down and reading a seventh grade type novel, and it had to be fiction, was just a challenge for him. And me trying to get him to do this at home was a challenge as well. And so finally I was like, you know what? We're going to go audiobook. So what we did was we found audiobooks that were seventh grade fiction level audiobooks. And we would spend a little time every day listening together to the audiobook. And then after we listened for that day, we'd have a conversation for comprehension. So, and he sat there and sometimes he played with Legos, or he would, do a puzzle game on his phone or something like that. But every time I checked in with him, I was like, so what's going on right now? And he was like, this, and this. I'm like, okay. So he was still paying attention. He was still focused on it. He could still comprehend the content. We could still talk about it. But he just wasn't, a lot of teachers and a lot of adults expect children to be able to sit there and just, focus on the book or reading. And some of them are much more effective at being able to understand words through audio than they are at reading. Is he still going to have to read? Sure. Does he still read? Sure. But if we have options, and we can provide options to people, then we want to provide the option that is going to be the most effective for them in terms of their learning. So yeah, the chapter does talk about memory, long-term, short-term memory, and metacognition, and also meta memory. So what do I know about my own memory, how to create memories for myself, what can I do best, what I know works for me, things like that. The chapter also goes into intelligence testing, creativity. And usually when kids start school, this might be the time that we start to recognize that maybe our child is advanced, or that our child may be cognitively behind others. So we might have them assessed by the licensed school psychologist to figure out if maybe they have a learning disability or if they have a learning difference. The difference between those two is one is related to the legal domain. So, for example, if my child has dyslexia, that is a learning disability, and that the school has to provide services to help my child. Whereas if my child has ADHD, granted that is a psychiatric diagnosis, but is it causes challenges for learning. And one of the things that we can do is help students through accommodations, to learn better. So that would be a learning difference as opposed to a disability, if that makes sense. What else is going on in this chapter? So creativity is in here, intellectual development, and then also looking at heritability of intellectual development, creativity, all that sort of stuff. And we do see that there is some genetic component to a lot of this learning stuff that we're going to be talking about, to language development and how quickly we do those things. There is about 40 to 60% heritability. The other is going to be influenced by the environment. So we want to be, reading with our children, reading around our children, showing that we enjoy it, learning and continuing to learn, even if it's not through formal schooling. So, for example, finding academic videos on YouTube or something like that, something from, Nat Geo or something like that, that you can sit and learn something from and then have a discussion with your child about it. The chapter also goes over bilingualism, and one of the things that we know about that is that people who are bilingual generally tend to make more money every year than a person who only speaks one language. It used to be $5,000 on average more. I don't know what the average is right now. But even just thinking about that, if you want to set your child up for better success, it would be useful to have them learning to speak a second language, third language. And we can start, there's no, too early to start teaching a child a second language, although there will be potentially some sort of delay for full development of both languages. What we do see is that once the child has developed full development of both languages, I mean, they're fluent in both languages. Whereas if we wait and teach a child a second language in like high school, which is what state of Texas does, they require ninth graders to start taking a language, whereas they should have been, integrating it from kindergarten or first grade on. A lot of other countries do that. So it is much easier for us to learn a second, third, fifth language from birth on than it is to try to get a teen brain to pick up a new language and become fluent at it. Okay, so those are our concepts and talk about this week. If you have questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I will get those answered whenever I can. Next week, we are going to be, in the next unit, we're going to be talking about middle childhood, social and emotional development, and then that is our last unit for child psychology. Remember, we do offer an adolescent psychology class. Obviously, that will pick up at, like 12, 13 years old and move on from there. But if that is going to be a separate class from this class. So again, any questions, let me know, and I hope to talk to you soon. Thanks.